There's something different about people who grew up in the 1980s. Maybe it's the way they can toggle between complete sincerity and ironic detachment without missing a beat. Maybe it's how they navigate technological change with neither the fear of older generations nor the entitlement of younger ones. Or maybe it's that peculiar ability to exist in the gap between analog childhood and digital adulthood, comfortable in both worlds, but native to neither. Because the 1980s didn't just raise a generation, it created a specific type of psychological duality that experts are only now beginning to decode. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why growing up in that decade produced some of the most adaptively ambivalent people walking the planet today. Let's start with something that shaped every single 1980s childhood in ways most people never consider. Picture yourself on a Tuesday afternoon in November of 1983. You're 9 years old, standing at your front door, fishing a key from around your neck or from under the doormat. You unlock the door and step into an empty house. The silence isn't scary. It's just yours. You drop your backpack, grab the Cheez-Its from the pantry, and turn on the TV. 3 channels are showing soap operas. 1 has a game show, and Channel 11 has G.I. Joe reruns. You know you have exactly 2 hours before your mom gets home from work. The phone rings. You've been taught to answer with Smith residence instead of hello, because that sounds more like an adult might be home. It's your mom checking in. Yes, you're home. Yes, you locked the door. Yes, you'll start your homework after your show. You settle into the couch with your snack. The house creaks. The refrigerator hums. You're alone, but you're not lonely. This is just what happens every day between 3:15 and 5:30. By 1984, 7 million kids were doing exactly this. What researchers now call self-directed time management was just you figuring out how to fill empty hours. Child development psychologists have discovered that this daily practice of structuring unmonitored time built executive function in ways that constant supervision cannot replicate. You were making micro decisions constantly. When to start homework, how long to watch TV, whether to call a friend, what to eat. Each decision was low-stakes practice in autonomy. The mild anxiety of being alone wasn't trauma. It was what psychologist Sonia Luther calls optimal stress, just enough challenge to build competence without overwhelming capacity. This created adults who don't panic when left to their own devices, who can work from home without constant supervision or structured accountability, who understands that solitude and loneliness are completely different things. But if Challenger taught you that institutions couldn't guarantee safety, your neighborhood taught you something entirely different about risk. Let's talk about what happened when the streetlights came on. It's a summer evening in 1987, and you're playing kick the can with neighborhood kids 3 blocks from your house. Your parents have no idea exactly where you are, and that's completely normal. You've been outside since lunch. You've ranged across a dozen backyards, through the woods behind the development, down to the creek. You'll come home when you're hungry, or when the streetlights come on, whichever happens first. This is just summer. But you've also seen the missing children on milk cartons. Adam Walsh, Eaton Pats, those faces staring at you during breakfast. Your school had an assembly about stranger danger. A police officer taught you never to accept rides or candy from people you don't know. Your parents watched those TV movies. Adam and I know my first name is Steven, and got this look on their faces. So you roam free, but there's this low-level awareness humming underneath. The world is dangerous. Predators exist. Bad things happen to kids. But also, go outside and don't come back until dinner. Both things are true simultaneously. What criminologists call the child safety panic of the 1980s created a fascinating paradox. Despite media saturation about child abduction, actual crime rates were declining, Sociologist Joel Best documented that stranger abduction was statistically rare, but moral panic was statistically universal. 1980s kids lived in this contradiction. Massive independence coexisting with massive fear. Psychologically, this created what researchers term calibrated wariness. Not paralyzed by fear, not oblivious to danger, but constantly performing micro-risk assessments. You learn to trust your instincts about which adults felt safe, which situations to avoid, which shortcuts to take. These adults have finely tuned threat detection without debilitating anxiety. They don't helicopter parent their own kids because they know statistically the world isn't more dangerous than it was. It's just more documented. But they also don't dismiss concern as paranoia. They assess situations individually rather than categorically. When their kid wants to walk to school alone, they don't automatically say no out of fear or yes out of principle. They evaluate that specific kid, that specific route, that specific context. They learned young that danger is real but rare, and that the risk of overprotection might exceed the risk of reasonable freedom. That freedom to roam existed alongside another experience that kept you completely still. Consider what it felt like to be trapped in a car for hours with your family. It's July of 1988, and you're in the back seat of your family's station wagon, 6 hours into an 8-hour drive to your grandparents' house. There are no screens, no movies, no individual entertainment systems. You've got a book, maybe two. You've played the license plate game until you ran out of states. You've counted red cars. Your sister is sitting next to you, and you've already fought twice over the invisible line dividing the back seat. Your dad said he'll turn this car around if you don't stop, and you believe him enough to stop for now. The scenery outside is boring. Farms, more farms, a barn, more farms. You watch telephone poles pass and try to count them. You make up stories about the people in other cars. You think about nothing for long stretches. Your legs are cramped. You're simultaneously desperate to arrive and resigned to eternity in this car. Your mom passes back snacks. Your dad listens to talk radio. Nobody asks if you're having fun because this isn't fun. It's just what traveling is. What neuroscientists call undirected thought or mind wandering was happening every time you stared out that window with nothing to do. Research by psychologist Jonathan Schooler shows this state is crucial for memory consolidation, creativity, and self-reflection. The forced boredom of the family road trip created hours of unstructured mental space that built imagination. You weren't being entertained. You were entertaining yourself. Additionally, psychologist Susan Pinker notes that enforced proximity, even uncomfortable proximity, built family intimacy through shared experience and the navigation of conflict in inescapable circumstances. These adults can tolerate discomfort without needing immediate escape. They can sit through boring meetings, long flights, and waiting rooms without constant stimulation. They don't pathologize boredom as something to fix instantly. When they travel with their own families, they understand that the tedium is part of the bonding, that struggling through something together creates connection. They're also comfortable with silence in relationships. They learned young that being together doesn't require constant conversation or entertainment. The ability to just exist alongside someone without performance or distraction is increasingly rare, but 1980s kids carry it like muscle memory from those endless backseat hours. But while those road trips built intimacy through suffering, there was another family dynamic that built something entirely different. Let's talk about dinner time. It's 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday in 1989, and you're sitting at the dinner table staring at a pile of lima beans you don't want to eat. Your father has just said the words you've heard 100 times. You'll sit there until you finish. The family sits down together every night. Not most nights. Every night. This isn't a special occasion. It's a non-negotiable routine. The TV is off. The phone stays on the wall. Everyone is present at the same time, eating the same food. and you hate lima beans. You've made this known. But your mom says she's not a short order cook. You get what everyone gets. Your dad launches into the story about starving children in Ethiopia. Your sister is already done and wants to be excused. You're pushing beans around your plate, wondering if you can hide them in your napkin. Your parents aren't budging. This is the rule. You eat what's served, but you're learning to negotiate within the rules. How many do I have to eat? 5 beans become the compromise. You choke them down and escape to watch the Wonder Years. What family researchers call structured meal rituals created multiple layers of socialization simultaneously. Psychologist Ann Fischel's research shows that regular family dinners correlated with better academic performance, lower substance abuse, and stronger family bonds. But there was also something else happening. You were learning to exist within non-negotiable frameworks while still advocating for yourself. The rigid rule had flexibility within it. You couldn't choose not to eat, but you could negotiate how much. This taught what psychologists call bounded autonomy. The ability to exercise agency within constraints rather than expecting unlimited choice. These adults understand that not everything is negotiable, but almost everything is negotiable within bounds. They can work within institutional structures they didn't design without feeling oppressed by them. They know how to push back on authority without rejecting it entirely, how to work the system without breaking it. In workplace conflicts, they're skilled at finding the compromise within the rigid policy, the flexibility within the bureaucracy. They learned at the dinner table that absolute freedom and absolute control are both illusions. Real life happens in the space between. That's not resignation. It's sophisticated social navigation. But dinner time wasn't the only place where authority and independence collided. Consider what happened on Friday nights. It's 1986, and your family is at Blockbuster Video. The entire weekend's entertainment depends on what you choose in the next 15 minutes, and you can only choose 2 movies. The store is packed. Families are circling the aisles like sharks. The new release wall is already half empty. The good movies are gone. Someone got there first. You scan the shelves desperately. You wanted to see Back to the Future, but there are only empty plastic cases where the tapes should be. So you adjust. You start reading the backs of boxes, examining cover art, trying to determine from a 3-sentence plot description whether this is worth your weekend. Your dad is impatient. Your sister wants a comedy. Your mom vetoes anything too violent. You're negotiating, compromising, and the clock is ticking. You finally choose. You take your 2 precious VHS tapes to the counter. The clerk checks your membership card. Late fees from last time? Your dad pays them, annoyed. You've got these movies until Sunday. That's it. Make them count. What economists call constrained choice created a different relationship to media consumption than either previous scarcity or subsequent abundance. Psychologist Barry Schwartz's research on the paradox of choice suggests that too many options create anxiety and decision paralysis, while too few create dissatisfaction. Video stores hit a sweet spot. Enough choice to feel agency. Enough constraint to force commitment. You couldn't watch everything, so you had to choose carefully. You couldn't preview, so you developed pattern recognition. Directors, actors, genres. You built curation skills because you had to live with your choices for an entire weekend. These adults make decisions efficiently within constraints. They don't spiral in analysis paralysis when faced with options because they learned early to gather limited information and commit. When streaming services offer thousands of movies, they're paradoxically more satisfied than younger generations because they don't expect to make the perfect choice. They expect to make a good enough choice and enjoy it. They also value recommendations and curation more than algorithm-driven suggestions Because they remember when the video store clerk's knowledge was your best navigation tool. They understand that limitations can improve rather than diminish the quality of experience. Choice is good. Infinite choice is overwhelming. But let's be honest about what else was happening during those blockbuster trips and family dinners. There was a fear that 1980s kids carried that previous generations didn't quite understand. Picture what it felt like in 1983, when The Day After aired on ABC. You're sitting in your living room on November 20th, watching a made-for-TV movie about nuclear war. 100 million people are watching with you. The movie shows Lawrence, Kansas, getting hit by nuclear weapons. You watch people vaporize. You watch radiation sickness. You watch civilization collapse. This isn't some distant historical event or abstract threat. This is Middle America. This is what could happen to your town, your family, your life. The next day at school, teachers are trying to process what you all watched. Some kids are genuinely terrified. Your parents seemed shaken too. And unlike the duck and cover drills that shaped 1960s kids, you're old enough to understand that no desk is going to save you. That if this happens, there's no preparation that matters. What psychologists studying Cold War anxiety call ambient existential dread was your baseline. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev are negotiating. Tensions are rising and falling, and you're just a kid trying to figure out if you should bother planning for the future when the future might not exist. The nuclear threat wasn't abstract. It was Threads and Testament, and War Games, and Red Dawn. It was everywhere in your media, your conversations, your nightmares. But here's what's fascinating. You still did your homework. You still worried about whether you'd make the soccer team. You still cared about whether that girl in your math class liked you back. Developmental psychologist Emmy Werner studied resilience in children and found that kids who maintained normal routines and social connections despite ambient threat developed what she calls learned hopefulness. Not denial, not toxic positivity, but the ability to invest in the present despite uncertainty about the future. These adults can function during a crisis without falling apart. When the pandemic hit, when economic collapse threatened, when political instability surged, 1980s kids didn't spiral the way some other generations did. Not because they're tougher, but because they'd been practicing living with existential uncertainty since they were 8 years old. They learned young that you can acknowledge catastrophic possibilities and still show up for your life. But while you were learning to live with nuclear dread, you were also experiencing a kind of freedom that would become almost unimaginable to later generations. Consider what happened on a Saturday morning in 1985. You wake up at 7:30, eat a bowl of Fruity Pebbles in front of the TV, then you get on your bike and you just leave. No cell phone, no GPS tracker, no way for your parents to reach you. You've got $5 in your pocket and the entire day stretched out ahead of you. You ride to your friend's house. You knock on the door. If they're home, great. If not, you ride to the next friend's house. You end up at the arcade, at the comic book store, at the park, at the creek, at someone's basement playing Nintendo for 3 hours. Your parents have no idea where you are. They're not worried. You said you'd be home by dinner, and they trust you will be. By 1989, researchers estimated that 85% of children aged 8 to 12 spent significant unsupervised time outside their homes. This wasn't neglect. This was normal. What developmental researchers now call autonomous risk navigation was happening every single time you made a decision without adult input. Which route to take, whether to jump that gap, how to handle the older kids at the basketball court, whether to go into that convenience store where the owner always watches you suspiciously. You were building what psychologist Peter Gray calls an internal locus of control, the bone-deep belief that you can handle what comes, that you're capable of solving problems, that you don't need constant adult intervention to survive the world. These adults don't catastrophize uncertainty. When plans change, when situations get complex, when problems don't have clear solutions, they don't immediately look for someone to fix it for them. They assess, they adapt, they figure it out. Not because they're more capable, but because they've been doing it since they were 10 years old, riding their bikes through neighborhoods their parents couldn't see, making choices no one was monitoring, learning through direct experience what works and what doesn't. This all adds up to something profound about the psychology of 1980s kids. Because all these experiences, the latchkey afternoons, and the blockbuster negotiations, the nuclear dread, and the unsupervised bike rides, the family road trips, and the telephone conversations everyone could hear, they weren't separate lessons. They were building a specific psychological architecture. You learn to be alone without being lonely, to make careful choices within artificial constraints, to live with existential uncertainty while still investing in the present, to negotiate within rigid systems without either blind obedience or futile rebellion. You experience the last moment of pure analog childhood before the digital revolution, which means you remember what life was like before and learn to adapt to what came after. You're not nostalgic for rotary phones or terrified of artificial intelligence. You're fluent in both languages. This wasn't a perfect childhood. The latchkey isolation left some kids genuinely lonely, not just independent. The nuclear anxiety created real trauma for some. The stranger danger panic calibrated incorrectly in many cases, producing either excessive fear or dangerous obliviousness. The rigid family structures hurt kids who needed more flexibility, more understanding, more space to be different than expected. Not everyone emerged resilient. Some emerged guarded, unable to ask for help because they learned too young to handle everything alone. But there is something different about people who grew up in the 1980s. That toggle between sincerity and irony. It comes from living in the gap between analog childhood and digital adolescence, from learning that everything permanent becomes obsolete and everything revolutionary becomes normal. That comfort with technological change, it comes from watching the world transform gradually enough to understand each step, but quickly enough to know that nothing stays the same. They learn to hold contradictions, nuclear threat and normal life, complete freedom and complete surveillance, rigid rules and flexible negotiation, family togetherness and radical independence. In a world increasingly divided between digital natives who never knew life before smartphones and digital immigrants who never fully adapted, 1980s kids exist in the border zone. They're the last generation that remembers both worlds and the first generation that had to become fluent in both. That bilingualism, that psychological flexibility, that comfort existing between two contradictory truths rather than fully committing to either one, might be their most valuable inheritance. Because the future will keep demanding exactly what they practiced every single day. The ability to hold two opposing realities and function anyway.